Continuing the tutorial, we jump back to these other tools over here. Sorry. I'll jump back to these tools over here. I was talking about the object tools. This would be the object constraints, where you add them manually. I don't have any for this one because this is the default. Object modifiers, same thing. Object data. Again, nothing there. Nothing that I've added. But here's the important part. Material. Now, materials are very useful for rendering if you're not using the effects of a game or something to render. So if you want it to be shinier or not, for example. Or if you want it to be translucent. So you have ambient lighting, you have translucency, you have all sorts of different things that you can add to a material. Now, of course, you do need to have a material that you're working on. In this case, they've given you one. If you actually create an object, you do not get that. So, for example, if I go back to my window here, I go Add, Mesh, UV Sphere. There's my sphere. I'll move it. Zoom out a little bit. Notice there's no material over here. So if I want to add a new material, and there we go. But it is a tricky business. If you go to edit mode, you can actually select by material. That's a cool feature. If I deselect that, and if I select by material, select that material, select, it only selects that material. Now, another thing that you have to keep in mind is that although if you make a UV map for something and you unwrap that to your UV editor and make a texture for it and display it in Blender and so on, that will not display in many graphics programs that you would export to or games that you would export to unless you also assign the texture to the model. So you would do that by introducing a new texture here. See, I moved the button over, new, and then you would assign some texture to that material. So the easiest way, I think, is just to open your texture image here. But obviously there are a lot of different ways of doing this. You can see that. As I said, Blender is as complicated or as uncomplicated as you want it to be, which is one of the main things I like about it. Now, speaking of UV mapping, we should take a look at something related to all of this that you will see in the next tutorial. For this, I'm not going to save this. I'm going to open a Cheerios box model that I've built. If this will let me. Got to open the correct directory, of course. Alright, so this is a model of a Cheerios box that I built. I have one material, one texture, which of course is the Cheerios box Targa file there. Now if I switch to edit mode, and I select all, the A key, already was selected. Down here, there's a little menu that can change the view. So that includes all sorts of different tools. The ones that I use the most are the 3D view, which is what you see here, and the UV and image editor, which shows you your UV map and allows you to manually edit it and save it with the file, which is a huge advantage over 3D Studio Max because as soon as you change the layer that you're working on in 3D Studio Max, it erases this on you. And you have to do the whole thing over. But I've already unwrapped this model. I'll show you how to do that actually. You select all your sides that you want to unwrap, mesh, UV unwrap, unwrap, and it's as simple as that. And then you can go to your UV editor. But I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it here. Just one feature I should point out before I do that, though. Here we are in edit mode. If we select one of these edges, select that vertex, then select that vertex. Notice that this edge is displaying in red, but if we go to object mode, it's not. That's because this edge has been marked as a seam for UV mapping. So if I go to Mesh, Edges, Clear Seam, it goes black. If I go to Mesh, Edges, Mark Seam, it goes back to red. So, moving right along, I'm going to jump to the UV image editor right here. And if you look carefully, you can see that my texture has these other vertices, edges, and faces over it. This is the UV map, or the visual representation of it, and it determines where the texture will display on the model. And this is much easier to do in Blender than in 3D Studio Max. And you can move these using these tools over here, Translate, Rotate, Scale, and Shear. Translate actually means move. Translate, of course, is a rather vague term that's similar to transform in 3D graphics or any kind of graphics. But in this case, it means move. So if you want to move a vertex, you select it, as you can see there. You click the Translate button, and then just move your mouse. There we go. So you can see it moving there just because I'm moving my mouse up in the upper left. And then see if I do mess around like this. Say if I leave it off like that. You click the left button again or right button to deselect. If you go over to the 3D view, it's all messed up. See that? So we jump back to this. Well, actually, it's useful here to know a keyboard shortcut. Control-Z for undo. Because you don't have access to those here, so you have to do Control-Z and Control-Z. And now it's back to normal. There it is. Now, to construct a texture, it's useful to know another feature. So we go back to the UV image editor. UVs, export UV layout. Right here. So if I click this, it then asks me where to save this PNG file. And I would probably save it somewhere here. That can be basically a background layer in your image editor so that you know where to put the different parts of your texture. And in fact, without that, it's almost impossible to make an accurate texture, especially for anything with different sides and so on, like a Cheerios box, although my own opinion is that this is a very easy model to make, and so I'm going to follow up this video with a tutorial about how to make a Cheerios box, or any cereal box, really. Another thing you want to know, we'll jump back to the 3D view here, is that just like so many application programs, you will sometimes want to save as the native file, Blender file. Sometimes you'll want to export. And these are the default formats you can export to. 3D Studio Max, Collada, FBX, Stanford, Wavefront, X3D, and STL. And there are many others that you can add as plugins. So I have the Trains Mesh exporter installed there, which I've demonstrated in another tutorial, and import is similar. In any case, I'm out of time, so I'll see you in the next video.